Да започваме.
We are starting.
Добре, може да започнем. Да.
We can start this session,
която е като
which will
основните
be
специални сесии.
one of the main special sessions during this conference. It has to do with the role of AAC in preventing violence against children and adults with communicative disorders. This presentation has been prepared jointly with Professor Grinberg. We're trying to outline the main topic of interest in this domain, and they are very important, and they will be discussed as topics during the special session. In this case, we're focusing on the role of AAC in preventing violence against children with communicative disorders. We're starting with some statistical data. With it, we're trying to establish what is the number of children with communicative disorders in Bulgaria. And it turns out that the answer is not very easy. We have no ready answer. That's why you can see some estimations on the basis of data available on Bulgaria and sometimes based on international studies. According to statistical data, there are more than 1 million children in Bulgaria. The estimation of UNICEF Bulgaria is that 32,000 of these are with disabilities, and out of these, there are conditions leading to children having communicative difficulties. These are children with cerebral palsy and disorders of the autistic spectrum, Rett syndrome, muscular dystrophy. We have no data about, we have no breakdown of the data, but there are estimations which are based on foreign studies. You can see the different percentages, and when we apply these on the number of children in Bulgaria, you can see the number as an estimation that there are roughly about 8,000 children, probably with intellectual disorders and developmental disorders. It is considered that the children with the autistic spectrum disorders are less than 1%. So in Bulgaria, probably there are about 7 to 10,000 children with such disorders. About 30% of these are expected to have impaired or missing speech, so about 2,000 children for Bulgaria. The frequency of cerebral palsy is 2 per 1,000 live births, so this is about 2,700 or about 3,000 children with cerebral palsy. 65% of these need support in their communication. Roughly 1,700 children are with communicative disorders. Other diseases or conditions like the Rett syndrome are more rarely met. In Bulgaria, probably there are about 100 children with communicative disorders as a result of the Rett syndrome. So if we take a look at these estimates, we're not going to get an exact number about the number of children with disabilities who have communicative disorders, but at least we can have a rough estimate about the range in the scale. And this means that these are minimum about 10,000 children. 10,000 people in Bulgaria are with disorders which are usually linked to communicative disorders. With 4,000 of them, there is an impaired or missing functional expressive speech. And these are estimates so that we know what number of children we are talking about during this special session. Other data that are once again from foreign publications are related to the frequency of violence against children with disabilities. This is a report about the global assessments on violence against children with disabilities. You can see how many children are encompassed in this survey, which integrates the number from 92 other separate individual studies. The results are alarming. About 28% of children with disabilities, or 1 in 3 children, have been subject to violence. The risk of violence with children with disabilities is twice as high as those for children without disabilities. In some previous studies, people mentioned 3 or rather 4 times higher risk. But the absolute 28% is very alarming. 1 in 3 children with disability is undergoing violence, experiencing violence. And if we transpose this to the children in Bulgaria, it's expected that about 1,000, more than 1,000 children with communicative disorders may have become victims of violence. And when talking about violence, this survey means the different forms of violence, both physical and sexual, but also emotional or neglect. Usually, the last 2 forms of violence very rarely are part of the official statistics. And this is one of the issues which will be mentioned during the special session. What data is there? How can we collect and use such data? Why is it important to have such data for Bulgaria? Madam Kamelia Nikova of the State Agency for Child Protection will mention this topic as far as I know. Another important thing that I'm not sure you need to talk about for a long time, but for sure, I'd like to turn your attention to the fact that the topic of the special session, and in many presentations, we're going to hear about prevention against violence. Sometimes the focus is on investigation and trials, and this is an important aspect in fighting violence against children with communicative disorders. However, it's as important to have prevention of violence. We will never manage to prevent all forms of violence. However, it's not only my opinion, but the opinion of other presenters too, that prevention is an important part of the entire topic. And when we talk about prevention, we can think about action, what needs to take place at different levels. As regards the specialists, the professionals taking care of children with disabilities or who deal with working with alerts about children with disabilities, there needs to be more information about the forms of violence and how they could be avoided. We need to see work on creation of mechanisms for monitoring and supporting the families and the caregivers of children with disabilities. And in all the cases, I underline, we need to differentiate between the different types of violence. It's not only physical and sexual violence, which are more often being reported, and they can more frequently be proven using the terms of the trial proceedings, but we need to also consider the emotional violence and neglect. These are very hard to prove, unfortunately. From the viewpoint of the children who are with communicative disorders, we need to take into account that there need to be a lot of actions with these. We need to think how important it is for they to be informed about their rights. Children need to be able to distinguish between different forms of violence against them and identify them as actions which are unacceptable. However, it is as important to have people children can trust in order to share with them about violence. When they want to share cases of violence, if people are with communicative disorders, they need to be able to access AAC systems, but this is just a small part of the role of the AAC in this regard, because the access to an AAC system is not enough, as the topic of this conference says, AAC, beyond AAC, the access to a system is not enough, irrespective of what the system is. In the sphere of violence, it's very important for children to differentiate between different forms of violence, to know their rights, but also to have a vocabulary in the AAC system, which has to do with the option to report violence they have been subject to, or which they have evidence they have seen, and there should be materials in the AAC system they could use to report violence. And these are very important aspects of the role of AAC in counteracting violence against children with communicative disorders. We are trying to take steps in this regard as a foundation, ASSIST Foundation, and some of them have to do with raising awareness so that the topic about how AC is important to prevent violence against children with communicative disorders. Thanks to the speakers you can see here participating during the international conferences on AAC. We've been trying for several years to present this topic, both in terms of presentations or at symposia. And I'd like to say thank you both to Professor Borman and to Neta Benzev, to the other specialists from the ISAC professionals from Denmark, Italy, Germany, who for several years now have responded to my invitation to present the topic and to share their experience about what has been done and what is yet to be done in other countries outside Bulgaria. Another line of thinking along which we are trying to have a contribution and a role is with regard to having some national level or institutional level changes. We as an NGO are not a state institution, but we are a part of the National Council for Child Protection under the State Agency for Child Protection, and we are participating in a work group there for preventing violence and abuse of children, and we're actively participating in a discussion and in making proposals on the fact that this topic needs to be included in the action plan for implementing the national program on preventing violence against children and abuse of children. Luckily, I'm going to mention Kamelia Nikolova, but also all the other participants in the work group and in the National Council. I believe that they recognize how important this topic is, and we are going to hear some more later about this action plan.
About the action plan for implementation of the national program that includes several goals and objectives regarding the protection of children's disorders or complex communicative needs. They also include studies and analysis of their needs. Others have to do with the development of a registration system and system for support children, and the establishment of a system to guarantee the right to communication, including through the assessment and selection of a suitable AAC system and its provision free of charge. You will hear more about this a little later.
Не толкова на такова по-системно ниво дейности, но
some other activities that we've been working on, we are trying to assist the development and dissemination of materials about AAC that are related to the topic of violence. And all of you can visit our website and see one such board and download it. It's related specifically to violence they have experienced or have been subjected to. There are also some other examples like this in Communicator 5, where more details can be communicated by the child about violence they've experienced or witnessed. So these are some of the steps that we have been attempting, but there are many more and a lot more to be done. I said in the beginning that violence against people with communicative difficulties, unfortunately, is not only against children, but also against the adults with communicative disorders, and they are also a group that needs to be considered. And once again, we also need to think about legislative changes, trained professionals who can implement all these important steps in using AAC to prevent violence against people with communicative difficulties or disorders. All